Good morning. Welcome to the Research and Development. Assist a client from an idea through to claiming the tax rebate. How often have you done this with a client? If you've never done it, welcome. And I hope at the end of this conversation, you will understand that there are prospects out there looking for your assistance. And some of them could be your current clients or prospects. Research and development is an enormous industry, and it can open up many, many opportunities for SME businesses. Good morning. I'm Peter Towers, Managing Director of ESS BIZTOOLS. It all starts with an idea. Someone might wake up at 3 a.m. and go bing. An apprentice on the factory floor might be looking at what he's doing and goes up and says to his boss, why don't we do it this way? Or it could be someone that's been working in an office for years, has a thought about some changes that could be made, maybe to the software that they're using or the technology that's being used within the office. It starts with an idea. We've prepared the ESS BIZTOOLS Research and Development product package to assist accountants, bookkeepers, business advisors, and businesses themselves, but mainly for the professional advisors, for you to be able to give, first of all, preliminary advice to a client about a question about research and development. So you're sitting at your desk and you've got a small tradie client, and he says to you, can you tell me about the research and development tax rebate? Because a friend of mine's undertaking it, and I think I've got just as many ideas as he's got. So how do I get the taxation benefit? That might be the opening type of question that's put to you. Now, if you're a subscriber to ESS BIZTOOLS, you can immediately click onto your computer, and on your screen, you will have our preliminary overview on the research and development process. It will tell you that the applicant has to be a company. Your client currently might be a sole trader. So you would say to them, well, you're going to have to move across to becoming a company. And only the expenditure that's been incurred by the company can be claimed for the research and development tax offset. So all prior activities are not counting towards the special taxation benefits. And the company must incur legitimate research and development expenditure of more than $20,000 in a financial year to be able to claim the research and development tax incentive. So there's immediately some, not obstacles, but key points that you need to make sure your client understands. And you can readily reference this on your screen. Then at the end of the discussion, you might say to your client, now, would you like to have a discussion paper to help you have a better understanding of what we've been talking about? And hopefully the client will say yes, and you can say, I will send it to you. Because if you're a subscriber to ESS BIZTOOLS, you can badge one of the papers in our system and send it to your client, so that they've immediately got a response from you as their trusted advisor. Now, if the client wants assistance going further, wants you to help them on the entire process, our system covers that. And that's what we're going to start in this webinar today. We're going to cover the first 5 sections, but there is another 10, which we will continue in some further webinars, and we will be advising you of when they are on. So it starts with an idea. So if you wish to complete the services, as I just said, you can take your client right through to lodging the annual report that has to be submitted to Oz Industry. They're the federal government department that checks all research and development type claims and supervises a number of the federal government's grant programs. So they're quite experienced in this area. And once Oz Industry have reviewed the documentation that you would submit to them, they will then issue a reference number which you can then quote in the client's income tax return, which is then the notification to the tax office when they're assessing the tax return that Oz Industries has received their report. They've given it a preliminary overview, not a final one, but a preliminary overview, and they're happy for the taxation process to proceed relative to the treatment of the research and development expenditure. So that's the full story. But let's go back to the beginning. It starts with an idea. The research and development legislation is contained within the Taxation Act. That surprises some members of our profession, because some accountants have indicated to me they think they need to be a scientist or an engineer to give advice on research and development. I don't agree with that. You don't have to be a scientist or an engineer or a researcher. Far from it. Your role is not to advise your client on how to undertake their research activities. That's your client's responsibility. And it's very clear that it is your client's responsibility. The best way of explaining what we consider an accountant's, bookkeeper's, business advisor's role in this process is that you are the internal auditor, checking that all of the forms and documents that are required have been submitted, and that a systematic progression of work is the way the research activities have been conducted. And you might be saying to yourself, well, where do I find out all about this? Well, that's all in our system. We have 45 separate business advisory services forms to guide you through this process. I'm going to show some of those to you shortly. And we have flowcharts to better explain it to you. There's 13 of them. We're going to look at about 5 of them in this presentation. Your client will probably be working with consultants from the universities or other professional organisations. And it's their records that are very important in the overall process. So you'll have a series of checklists. You can be saying to the client, well, we need this and that. Sure, there's some financial calculations that have to be made, which we're not covering in this webinar. We'll do that in the next part of this series. But we'll explain that to you, and that's an area of work that you're very experienced in. So please don't be scared off by talk about having to be a scientist or an engineer. This is interesting and exciting work. Your team members will love it that they're involved in something that's a little bit different. And why not go out of your way to differentiate your services, promote that you're able to give advice on research and development on your website and in some seminars or webinars that you conduct. And we have pro formas of those prepared. You can badge them and use them if you're a subscriber, of course, so that you differentiate yourself in the marketplace. Because I can assure you there's nowhere near enough accountancy practitioners in Australia offering advice on research and development. We need a lot more to enable research and development to become part of the mainstream of advisory services, which I think are better described as being financial and commercial services. And research and development fits right in the middle of those, even though it was developed out of the Tax Act. It's not everyday taxation advice. So thousands of SMEs undertake research and development every year. This could be the start of the innovation journey for those businesses. And as they grow, they're going to require a wide range of financial, commercial advisory services from you. They definitely will. And these services will include, first of all, advice on how research and development operates. And that's why we've developed the material, not only for you. We originally wrote it with a series of forms and papers. And then when we had a test run with our subscribers, one of our subscribers in Melbourne rang me and said, Peter, why don't you prepare some flowcharts? I think it would be easier for people to understand. And the light went off in my head. Yes, that's the way to do it. So that's what we've done. We've got flowcharts to help you, and it shows the papers and the forms that they're describing, so you can immediately click onto them and show your client. Because it's important the client understands how this process works. There's an annual report that's got to be submitted on the research and development activities to Oz Industry. I mentioned that before. And there's obviously the company's taxation return, which is the final document to be prepared, which includes the all-important reference number supplied by Oz Industry, which is the trigger to the tax office to process the research and development claim, in the knowledge that Oz Industries has undertaken a preliminary review. And I'm stressing the word preliminary because they can come back and conduct an audit later on. And we need to remember that. It is important that there is strict adherence to the maintenance of records. And we'll be going through that shortly. And this is the internal auditor role, making sure your clients kept those. If they haven't, I'd be telling your client you cannot assist them, because it is dangerous if they have not kept the records that we're going to be going through today. So some of these other services could include, because the clients got underway, they've got a vision for a new product or service, they might want some assistance on applying for the Australian government's industry growth program, which is the successor to the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant, which was the successor to the COMET program, Commercialising Emerging Technology. The current program, Industry Growth Program, has grants of up to $250,000 on a 50-50 basis to enable work to be undertaken to create a better prototype, to firm up on research activities. The business would have already done some research, but to take it a bit further. And then to go into full production, to get a pilot plant operating, etc. There's grants of up to $5 million on a 50-50 basis. Recently, a SME received $4.3 million. And I call them an SME because under the rules, they have to be a company, and the turnover's got to be under $20 million per annum. Now, for a very small startup, 20 million probably sounds a lot of money. But according to the government, up to $20 million is considered to be a small business. Preparation and regular updates of the business plan are very important, because these type of businesses need business plans. Preparation of predictive accounting reports, budgets, key drivers of key sub-accounts, cash flow forecasts, predicted balance sheets. Mentoring your client on fundraising opportunities. Early stage innovation companies. That could be really an applicant for the early stage innovation company, because they probably fit into the criteria. Crowdsource funding equity raising companies could raise up to $5 million in 12 months, or even raising capital under Section 708 of the Corporations Act. Private company can raise up to $2 million in a 12-month period, but only from a maximum of 20 investors. It's the old legislation, which has been around for about 40 years. But your clients just can't go off and do these things. They need assistance. So this is the flow-on services, the real commercial hub. It's possible you could be involved in. And then you will probably be involved or should be involved in mentoring your client on corporate governance matters, unless your client has already undertaken the Institute of Company Directors diploma course. Most SMEs haven't. And most really do not understand the intricacies of being a company director. And the reason I mention that is as they grow and seek investment funds, there will be more and more pressure, encouragement to appoint experienced directors to their board. So your client doesn't want to be embarrassed by not understanding the various processes involved in being a company director. So you can use our material to give them some briefing. Ultimately, though, they probably should take a week out of their life and go to the company directors course. And at the end of this journey, there's the potential that if your firm wanted to be appointed as the virtual chief financial officer, you could seek that appointment, because young companies on the expansion pathway probably don't want to employ a full-time chief financial officer, but they need a lot of those services. Indeed, all SMEs need a lot of those services, but most certainly these sort of companies do. They're scaling up. They're creating some interest and excitement. So the ESS BizTools package includes 46 separate forms, 13 flowcharts, and 13 papers to help you. So it all starts with an idea. So let's go to that idea. We're now going to go to our website and we will share that idea. So on our screen now, we've got the members section of ESS BizTools website. So when you go to our website, the material that a visitor sees is the promotional area. But then we have a back end, which is where our members work, where they're going on to download whatever they want to work on today, or read some updates that we may have prepared. We have 4 main product packages. Starts with advisory intro, then works into starter package, then works into advanced, then works into the financial forecasting package. And everything that's included in the first one flows into the second into the third, and the third into the fourth. And there's a wide range of products. You can see there the various components, and they've all got their content. And you'll see here we've got research and development. It's one we're now going through. I'm just going to access it here in the list of what's in the system. So these are group product package specific content. So what we have on the screen now is the list of the material that's in the system. In ESS BizTools, we have what we call a procedure control form for each product package, so that you can go to them, read about them, and then click on. But we're going to be going through the flowcharts to guide you through this process today. Because in presenting webinars, we've got to have it work in a certain flow. Otherwise, it takes too long. The BASs are the Business Advisory Services forms. They all have a number. They have a title. And there's 46 of them. Now, I very much doubt if you'll ever use 46 forms for an individual client. But if you did 10 research and development projects a year, there's a possibility you might use those forms, but the total 46 forms have been prepared to cover every contingency. So don't worry that you mightn't be using some of these. After we go through the forms, we then hit FC, and FC is flowcharts. And at the end of the flow charts, we then go into papers. There are 13 papers in the system explaining different parts of the process. So I'm going to go back to flowchart. So we now have the flowchart FC50 on the screen. So what we're saying here is okay, hopefully you can now see that. My apologies. I missed the warning. Okay, what we have here is a flowchart that you could utilize with your client. There's a team meeting, there's a team discussion, and an idea comes out of it. Or as I said, I think in the preamble, an apprentice might come up with an idea, or someone in the office. And that idea gets discussed by them, by the supervisor, the manager, and they say, okay, that's not a bad idea. Let's put one or two people, three people together, and we tell them they got 2 days. They can have a look at it as a little project, keep their details. And we give it a reference number. So the small team gets assembled and they undertake some preliminary investigations. And part of that's going to be the look at the eligibility to be okay. Took a bit of getting, sorry. Here's the paper on the research and development eligibility. This is a typical ESS BIZTOOLS paper. If you're going to send this to the client, we say to you, you can remove our badge, you can put your own name there. Always has a set of contents. So let's look at the company eligibility. There are different categories. There's companies with turnovers under $20 million and there are companies with turnovers over $20 million because there's different taxation treatments. So for companies with turnovers under $20 million, the total benefit is the corporate tax rate plus 18.5%. So 25% plus 18.5%, 43.5%. For companies with turnovers over $20 million, the incentive is the company's corporate tax rate plus an incremental premium. Now, the premiums are based on the company's research and development intensity. The intensity is a percentage of the company's eligible R&D expenditure as a proportion of the company's total expenditure. So if eligible research and development expenditure is up to 2% of the total expenditure of the company, the incentive payment is 8.5%. So they at the corporate tax rate plus 8.5%. If the percentage of research and development expenditure to total expenditure is higher than 2%, the company receives a premium of 16.5%. We mentioned that the expenditure has to be $20,000 in the year. Summarize the company. So that's an overview of what applies for these companies. We have to identify prior art searches. And that's a scientific university type course, but basically it means has someone else already produced this product somewhere in the world. And here's the form. You would badge it at the top with your firm name or perhaps the client's name. It's the planning document. So who's going to be involved? What is the idea? What's the objectives of the project? If you're given it a number, who was on the original small team? It's very important that details are maintained of who's been involved in this project, especially if they're not employees, because confidentiality and ownership of the intellectual property being developed comes into play. Who is the project leader? What prior art searches have been conducted? And there's a paper that spells that out. What was the outcome of those searches? What hypothesis has been identified? So we need to go through and start documenting all of this information so that it's readily available. Who were the collaborative organizations that the client has talked to on the project? So we'll leave those there. And we have the documentation. This is a document called Planning the Systematic Progression of Work. You'll see that that terminology used a fair bit once you start reading about research and development, because the legislation assumes that a business is going to undertake the research the same way a university would. So it's a systematic process. They start with an idea, they identify what they're trying to achieve, they identify their hypothesis. But we want to record here what come back from the prior art searches. What material gave you an indication to the current knowledge? So you've searched and you can't find, but the documentation needs to be kept. If your client's relying on information on the internet, they should be printing that out, date stamping it, and keeping it in the records in case there's a subsequent audit. What did you kind find from searching scientific, technical, or professional literature? What was the core activity that was identified for this project? What were the significant reasons for planning to undertake this work? Was it the generation of new knowledge? Because that's very important. What was the hypothesis? The hypothesis should adequately describe technical or scientific ideas that can be tested through a systematic progression of research activities. So all these forms are prepared to assist you to get underway. Which competent professionals were approached for advice? And you're not one of the professionals. You're the internal auditor, as I see it. But they may have approached some professional consulting firms who undertake assignments in this area, or universities. So who were they? And this is all part of developing a file so that if Oz Industry in particular want to understand what the process that was implemented, they can see that it was done in an appropriate manner. Because the claims can be very high, millions of dollars. Who were the experts that were consulted, and so on. What were the core activities proposed for the project? This is a key paper, planning a research and development project. You see, we go back to the idea, the small team. So this is the paper that really summarizes what we've just been going through, looking at the flowchart. I'd be giving your client both of these documents, the paper and the flowchart, so they can sit there and have a better understanding of what all this relates to. So we go back and look at the introduction to the research and development tax incentive. And you can see we've got links to some of those forms which we've already had a look at. But any of those forms, you just click and go across. This takes a little bit of time on a webinar, so I'm not going to do that. We look at the project, at the small team that's involved, what preliminary investigations, the prior art searches. So we're now putting words to the flowchart to help your clients have a better appreciation. And incidentally, to start all this off in your firm, this is a staff training project. Working through this exactly the way I'm doing it at present for you. We need to identify the core activities. I think I just mentioned that. The hypothesis determination, who we've approached, advice. Could the outcome of the experiment be known or determined in advance? You cannot answer yes to that, because if so, you will not be able to claim the research and development benefits, because the government's not going to fund Australian businesses undertaking research into projects that the answers are already known. I think there should be a research and development plan. That's not mandatory for a small business, but I think it's a good concept. So we have details of what we think should be included in a plan. And then a submission to the board of directors, because the legislation assumes that the board of directors will approve, will be consulted, and they will issue an approval for a company to embark on research and development projects. So we have a report to go to the board. We have standard minutes of the board giving their approval. So that's that first part. I want to move on. So we're now going to go to FC051, which is getting ready. So this is the follow on. So we say to your client, well, we're going to appoint a team. Have we got people already signed up in employment agreements? And have they signed an assignment of intellectual property agreement? Because this work might not have been exactly what their employment agreement covered. So I'd be suggesting that your clients get advice from their workplace consultant and their lawyers, confidentiality agreements. But these things are very important when it comes to contractors. What's the basis of appointment of contractors? I've had people that have been working on a research and development project for nearly 12 months that contact me and want some advice, and we talk to them, and I say, well, what's your agreement with contractors? Oh, what do you mean? And there's been no thought about protecting the intellectual property. And some of those contractors have put their hands up and said, well, we're entitled to part of that because we didn't charge you the full rates for our services because we believe we're entitled to part of the intellectual property. Can lead to some very confronting situations. Best to get it sorted out up front. So the work contract, so raise this with your client. Same with the other professionals that have been looked at. It doesn't matter if they're universities. We need to clearly understand who's going to own the intellectual property that's been developed. I think it should be your client, but perhaps there's other reasons for changing it, especially if your client's receiving a discount. And then we look at eligible expenditure. We think it's a good idea to have project codes to save people having to write on their timesheets, say 10 words to describe what they've done. Why not develop a code book and describe the key work that's likely to be undertaken in this project and give it a number so they just write down the number? Saves a lot of time. And the same with task codes. You could allocate them, and we got details in the system. We talk about work diaries. How do you calculate the labour on cost? And then there will be a research and development labour summary. So the key paper in all this is 052014, and we'll just have a quick look through it. So it's the same process as the previous paper we looked at, which was summarising what was in that first flow chart. This is the second flow chart, obviously. We've got our team, and they're all the matters that we just looked at in the flow chart. Some of our subscribers tell me that some clients only want to look at the flow charts. It's probably all right, but I think you should always give them the paper as well so that they've got the full details in this overall process. The next step I want to go to as we conclude this flow chart, so it's talking about costs, and you can go through this at your leisure if you agree to become a subscriber. The next flow chart is FC052. Planning the research and development work project. So here we're looking at what information we got back from the prior art searches. If you're trying to undertake work overseas, you're going to have to go through a lengthy process to prove that you cannot undertake your research and development activities in Australia. It's difficult to get that approval. And you then need to fund an overseas finding application. And there is a paper which takes you through this process and gives some more detailed commentary on the prior art searches and work that cannot be undertaken in Australia, and how you submit an overseas finding application, and that is 5510. You can have a look at that in detail. It goes on for some pages. It is not easy to get that approval, but paper's there, you've got it, so you can talk to your client about it. This next one is protection of intellectual property. Now, this is not strictly research and development. It's got nothing to do with Oz Industry or the tax office. And I think it's got a lot of information that your client needs to be aware of, because this could be the start of developing a very valuable asset. You want to make sure that your client has the control that they think they have in a legal sense. And we've talked about some of this already, but I think it's very important to be communicating to your client that they probably should have a patent attorney. And it's a good idea for the client to go and talk to a patent attorney, and many of them will want you to go with them, so that they get the input from that professional person who understands the patent process very well, like the back of their hand. It's their livelihood. And then the patent attorney will probably be saying, well, I want to be kept informed. I want to be kept up to date. Give me progress reports every month or every 2 months, so that we can take opportunities of the patent legislation if the decision is to apply for patents, and that might not be an automatic decision. So your client needs to go through this process and understand their options. Making sure we got all the documents signed, which we've already talked about. So that's a bit of a wake-up call to your client, that they should never assume that they're dealing with friends, so they would never make a claim against them for part of the ownership. This is potential legal disputes over an asset that could be worth a lot of money in the marketplace. It's best to get advice. And from your point of view, it's very important that you make sure this is all submitted to your client in writing, with this documentation, with the paper, with a suggestion or recommendation, strong words, that they at least see their solicitor, a commercial solicitor, and also you recommend they see a patent attorney. And I'd be saying, here's the list of the patent attorneys in our area where they operate from. Because unfortunately, things can go wrong. And in the year, 2, 3, 5 years' time, your client might be a very bitter person because something went wrong in this process. The people they thought were helping them, their mates, turned out to be people who were lodging claims for a significant part of the intellectual property. And they might turn around and start looking to who to blame for this. So you need to make sure that you are adequately protected in this process. Obviously, talk to a lawyer if you need more input. And if you don't understand the patenting process, perhaps you should be making an appointment and just spending an hour or two with a patent attorney and paying them for their professional advice to get them to take you through what the process is all about. I've worked with quite a number of patent attorneys over the years, and I gained something out of every time I have a meeting with a patent attorney. I always take notes, and I go back and I write up my system notes on patents based on what a patent attorney has told me and what they've submitted to me. I think you should be doing the same thing, especially if we're going to be offering a service built around research and development. You don't do the patent attorney's work, of course, but it's a good idea to understand where they're coming from. So we're now on systematic progression of work. This is a very important component of this overall system. Because as I said before, the legislation basically assumes that businesses will conduct their research activities in a similar manner to what a university or a scientific research organization would. So it all starts off with, again, in the flow charts, looking at, we've got a code, we identify who the researchers are. We clearly identify what the hypothesis or hypotheses are. We might only have one hypothesis, well, we might have a number of them. What's the rationale and background research? What inquiries has the client made? This is the checks that they've made with on the internet, through a patent attorney, through reading technical journals. It's the prior art searches. What do they find? And then we need to make sure they're summarizing the experiments that they've conducted. They need to keep a record. This is one of the 46 forms that you need to be saying to your client, well, you've told me you did experiments in the middle of May. Where's the details? Who was there? What time? What time did it start? What time did it finish? What were the results? And let me say something very quickly. The results do not have to be positive. They do not have to be successful. If the hypothesis is proved wrong, that's not the end of being able to claim the research and development tax incentive. The key thing here is to keep the records, to go through the systematic methodology of undertaking these projects. The government knows that far from everyone being successful, it's probably lucky if 50% are successful in their various research activities, or in some of those research activities. Hopefully they're successful in some of them. So the experiments conducted, the start, the finish date, the task, what task codes, how was the experiment undertaken, what were the observations, evaluations, conclusions, and who worked on it? What did it cost? That's more in your area, the cost side of it. That means they've got timesheets. They've identified the project they were working on. They've identified the task codes for the tasks that they were doing, because we need to assemble all this evidence. I worked on a client that was claiming about $4 million in research and development. And they had about 35 people working in the project. About 30 of them were overseas people. A lot of them were university students or graduates who were in Australia for a year or two, and they were working on this project. Now, they'd work, they got paid, and they ultimately left Australia, went back to wherever they were from around the world. And then, let's say 2 years later, the tax office come knocking on the door and say, we want to do an audit. And if your client has not got accurate timesheets, has not got these experimental summaries, and we've got them all in our documentation for you to give to your client and guide them in this process, how are they going to offer any evidence to the tax office or Oz industry that legitimate research experimental activities were conducted? They're on very thin ice. Where would they contact these people that conducted this research? They've now gone to other parts of the world. They're Americans, they're Canadians, they're Germans, they're from Ukraine, they're from England, Ireland, the world. You cannot get that information. And your client could be in real strife on substantiating that all this work took place. So to make sure it's not just your client's word back to the government investigator from the tax office or from Oz industry, we need to make sure that a file has been built up and is carefully filed away and kept, because it could be 2, 3, 4 years later that you receive an inquiry. And that's why this is so important, that first of all, you appreciate what I'm talking about, but then also your clients, obviously. And then they make sure it's properly filed, stored away. Then we've got a checklist of systematic progression of work. Team meeting to review results. This is, again, the process that the legislation and the guidelines issued by the tax office and Oz Industry envisage what would happen in a university. And obviously they've been there, they've observed, they've looked at their documentation. And they're basically saying, well, businesses need to keep the same information. And I'm sure the larger companies, which claim a lot of money on research and development, do abide by those rules. SMEs need to do the same thing. That's why we have written this material. I think research and development is a vital area for SMEs to be involved with. But I think it's also very important for accountants who are advising SMEs to have an in-depth knowledge of how this whole process works, so that you can really be the trusted advisor on this process. That your client has confidence that you know what you're doing. And that is the basis of why we've prepared this complete manual within ESS BizTools, to help you give that advice to your clients. And at the end of this, there's a governance statement that we think should be signed off by whoever's in charge, whoever's supervised, to say that everything has been conducted in accordance with the law and the processes. Hopefully that person is an Australian resident, so if need be, they could be produced in any disputes with the government departments. But hopefully, if all the records have been maintained, have been appropriately signed and dated and checked by you, again putting on that internal auditor hat to make sure that you've got a complete documented file. That's the way I go about these. We have a consulting business as well. We undertake these projects. We make sure there's a detailed file to support every dollar that we're claiming. We've got the experimental report. We've got the outcome report. We know who was there, whether there was one person or 20 people. And some of them have had large numbers of people in attendance. We got them, we got their time records. And we've got their description of the work they were undertaking. That's the way you undertake this whole process. And then we have the reports going back to the board of directors, because it's very important that there's this ongoing corporate reporting process. We're proposing that you would have a board report being prepared every 12 months. So that's our overview of the ESS BizTools material for the research and development. So I now just want to I've got that many forms sitting on my screen here. I'm having some difficulties going back to where I had to go back to. So I'm just going to say to you, thank you very much for participating in this webinar. We do have a special promotion for the research and development product package as part of our Christmas promotion. You can obtain the full package. You've only seen a third of it today. We will be running some subsequent webinars in January. We'll send you details of when they're on. And you can access the total research and development project package for $400 plus GST, so $440, 12 months license to use it with as many of your clients as you wish. To find out the details, please go to our website, www.essbiztools.com.au, and click on products and pricing, and then you can go through and find come up in order, the research and development product package. That special is available until the 23rd of December. If you've got any questions, please send me an email, peter@essbiztools.com.au. And while you're on our website and while you're looking at our products and pricings, you might look at the overall packages which we have at present. We have a 50% discount for our 3 initial product packages: advisory, intro, starter package, and advanced package. And we have a 33 1/3% discount for our financial forecasting package. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Merry Christmas, and I hope that 2025 will be very successful for you. Stay safe. Goodbye.